online guests who choose to come in and link into the session, and we also then have it available on the website afterwards for people to go back and listen to. And as you can appreciate, we have about a 40-minute discussion time period, and you have the opportunity to ask some questions. But I think the most important thing that we have is that you have the opportunity to know that you have access to a list of specialists, a group of specialists who can obviously assist and guide you through the difficult waters and questions of international financial planning. We're going to try and keep it as brief and as detailed as possible. We've given you handouts on your chairs. Please do make use of them with a pen and make some notes. We've given you free space to scribble and draw pictures and do whatever you need to, just so you trigger yourself in terms of questions that may come. Stop us, ask questions, you're very welcome to. It's a session for you. It's a session for you to be able to learn and understand. And I thank you for coming and taking the time out on this eve of a long weekend. But I thought I would just start with a indication of, we've done these for over 18 months now, and there's cocktails, there's some snacks and everything. And tonight's has been a very interesting snack choice. And I can assure you that in months gone by, the food has been absolutely delicious. But tonight we decided to keep it international. And what we did is we've used the Big Mac. And as you know, you've had your Mac and your chips. And the history of the Big Mac Index comes through from Pam Woodall, who was an economist in September 1956, as an illustration of the purchasing power, which is now published in the paper, by the paper annually. The traditional method of measuring the PPP, or exchange rates between two countries, is that the exchange rate should adjust in such a manner that a sample basket of goods and services should cost the same in both countries. In the Big Mac Index, the basket of goods only contains a Big Mac burger as sold by McDonald's all over the world, with some minor alterations. McDonald's was chosen as it's present in almost all countries. To obtain the Big Mac, the PPE exchange rate between two countries, the price of the Big Mac calculated in the country's currency is divided by the price of the Big Mac in another country. The value obtained will be the exchange rate. So when you're traveling and you have a Big Mac, because ironically, I think I heard who said that the last place they had a McDonald's was in Venice. So I think we can all relate. I think the last time I had a McDonald's was in China. So, and we have been there. It's strange how when we are in foreign places, we tend to go back to it. So that's why we had the Big Mac today, and understanding where the exchange rate comes from, and maybe we'll test it and see where it is the next time you're traveling anywhere else in the world. But if we get on to our international financial planning today, just wanted to make you aware of a new initiative that Discovery have introduced with the International Top 40. And what they did is at the end of last year, they calculated the support and the business that has been produced throughout all of their brokerages throughout South Africa. And we're very proud to be one of those top 40 international financial planning practices. So you have access tonight to not only myself, my team within Candid 2020, but a whole field of experts that are available to support and back us up. And I'll share with you some of those experts as we go through the session tonight.
I'll also just add that Shirley is one of the only ones in Gauteng to hold this accolade. So it's
thank you. Thank you. Thank you. So where in the world are you? And we have, as I've said, got guests that will come in from around the country. Hello, Andrew. I noticed you on the group. And he is in the UK, a former financial advisor within South Africa. We have other guests that will be coming through. And then obviously people that will be listening to the publication after the event. But what I'd like you to do is just think for a minute, where are you? Obviously, the people I'm speaking to in front of me are in South Africa, but the others, are you in the US? Are you sitting in China? Are you sitting in Dubai? Are you sitting in the UK? Because all of those questions are very important to financial planning. Now, you might ask, well, what does it matter if I'm sitting in South Africa? Well, it matters where your loved ones might be sitting in the world. So what we've done is we've given you an opportunity on our handouts just to say, where are you? And what assets do you hold? And obviously you're listening to me and we're talking and it's going to be relatively fast paced. But afterwards, I'd like you to perhaps draw up a list of those assets. Is it a property? Is it bricks and mortar? Is it financial assets in the form of an investment, a liquid investment, a bank account, etc.? Is it shares in a company? Because all of those are going to be bequeathed somehow, sometime, in the form of a will or in a trust, or however you may be distributing your assets from time to time. Then the question is to ask, who is going to be inheriting? Are they local? Are they in another country? And we'll cover some of those points as we go through the discussion point now. So if you can just think to yourself, what do I have? Where am I? What jurisdiction do I fall under? What laws of the land dictate what I can and what I can't do? Then, where are my loved ones? And maybe you want to say they're in the US, maybe they're in the UK, maybe they're scattered all over the world. And I know people that have family in the UK, in America, and in Australia, and I just feel sorry for them and their budget in terms of traveling around the world to get up and meet up with each other. But at the same time, it's important that we understand those jurisdictions. So what do they own? What do you own? Have they thought about what would happen to the assets that they're building up? Why are they there? We had a very interesting talk last month, and we discussed business continuity, family businesses. If you own shares in a business, what happens? Where does it go to? And I think what's very important, or came out of that as a nugget for me, was the family charter. Those of you that were here remembering that, and they discussed the need and the potential to have discussions with the family around the business, around the accumulation of wealth and what the anticipations would be and what the future planning would be for those assets. So I think having open discussions with your family is crucial. Sometimes we don't actually understand and appreciate why they're doing what they're doing. And that would give a lot of information and influence to how you're going to distribute your assets at time of death, or how they're going to distribute their assets at time of death. And unfortunately, we as financial advisors have the good or the bad job of constantly talking about the potential of bad things happening. Our job is to plan for the worst and then hope for the best. So we then start to talk about death. We start to talk about the potential loss of income and protecting that. And that's something that obviously helps us, but it's very difficult for families to sometimes raise those topics. And it's very difficult to know how to approach it with younger children who you don't want to worry, etc. But I think it's very important that we start to have some of those conversations. So if we move on from there, I think the next question that we'd ask is, what is the jurisdiction? What is the law that governs our decisions, governs our practices? We have changes to those legislations constantly. You may remember, and I'm talking now about South African legislation, you may remember that there was this need to financially immigrate if you were leaving the country. And it was an onerous process. Nobody really wanted to do it. There were two types of people: those that buried their head in the sand and said, no, I'm not going to worry about it. And then those that were desperate to get it done so that they could get their money moved offshore. And it was a very difficult process to try and move the money offshore. Financial immigration, as we know it, has changed. Even before that change to that legislation, we had in 2001, South Africa being changed from a source-based tax regime to a resident-based tax regime. And I think at the time we didn't realize and appreciate what that actually meant. We were then restricted to just earning income if it was generated in the country. Now, you may be responsible for tax even though you don't live in South Africa. So it's a resident-based tax process that we follow. With the changes to formal immigration happening, the big thing, the reason why a lot of people did it, was to close off their affairs, move across and have access to a lot of their pension and their provident fund money, which was typically one of the major reasons for financial immigrations at that stage. With that change, they said thereafter that if you were a non-tax resident for a period of 3 years or longer, you would now be able to access your pension or your provident fund, which then opened up a lot of doors for people to perhaps access some of their funds if they had become a non-tax resident. The question is, what's your tax status? What's your family's tax status sitting elsewhere in the world? And what we look at from that...
Sorry, something just to add there in terms of the retirement is that a lot of people think it's 3 years after they've left, not 3 years after they've ceased to be a tax resident. So it's quite an important distinction. And then as well as the taxation that you could face on those withdrawals of the retirement annuities and movements.
But if we start to explore what is a tax resident or what is a non-tax resident, and I think that's quite an important distinction to consider. You and I, as an ordinary tax resident, we earn our income here, we pay our tax here. It's relatively straightforward and it's relatively simple. However, for example, and I'm about to start divulging personal information, and I'm thinking maybe that's not a good idea. But if I take, for example, my daughters, they've left to go overseas. They were tax residents in South Africa. They're not a tax resident. They are. No, they're not. Well, the reality is that unless you've applied to SARS and you've actually changed your tax status, you're still a tax resident. So they ask a couple of questions. We have the physical presence test, which is, are you spending less than 91 days or more than 91 days in the country? Are you spending more than, I think it's 191 days over a 5-year period? There is a specific presence test that is applied to establish whether or not you're an ordinary tax resident or not. So in most cases where we do have family members that are sitting offshore and coming back occasionally for the odd family holidays, etc., the physical presence test is not going to apply for them. However, if they are not updating their tax status with SARS, they are still going to be deemed to be a tax resident in the country. And that has a very big onerous tax responsibility on them, in the sense that they will be potentially liable to pay tax on any income over 1.2 million rand. So if they're earning 1.2 million rand offshore, anything over and above that could be taxed in South Africa. We obviously have double taxation treaties with certain countries that would be taken into account, etc., but could perhaps potentially become a very big problem. Now, you might ask, why are we discussing this here to a South African audience physically? The reality is the tax status of your beneficiaries on a will or in a policy is going to be considered at time of payout of that winding up of the estate or the beneficiary, etc. So it's quite important that you establish what the tax status is of your loved ones that would be potentially benefiting from your policies, from your estate. There are a couple of tricky questions. SARS will ask submitting of zero tax returns, confirming that you're out of the country, providing proof of your exit from the country, providing proof of where you are similar things that SARS will be requesting for you, from you, in order to establish that you should in actual fact qualify as a non-tax resident. They ask crazy things like, this is where I wish I had Harry Joffe on hand, where he would say, where will you return to after your wanderings? Where do you own physical property? Where do you
club memberships?
Club memberships, where
club memberships,
gym memberships, etc., things of that nature. So those conversations and those points could be considered to determine the tax status. We have a lot of clients that we work with who are taking up the opportunity to travel the world on yachts, earning good money, potentially a lot over 1.2 million rand. Owning property in other parts of South Africa. Are they a tax resident? Are they a non-tax resident? What is going to happen to the inheritance when it comes, what is going to happen to their taxable income, etc. So very important thing to answer, and each and every person is going to be specific and different. There's no one size fits all, and I think it's important that when there is complications of tax residency, non-tax residency, that you seek the advice and assistance of an accountant to get a letter from them to confirm that SARS sees you as a non-tax resident. That then gives us clear clarity on what we can do in terms of investments, in terms of inheritance, etc. It's not as onerous to apply for a non-tax resident as it used to be for financial immigration. Part of the reasoning for this was that the closing of bank accounts, the tying and termination of all ties to the country was proving to be problematic for people who wish to return. So part of the non-tax resident system gives it very much ease for people to actually come back to the country, change their status to a tax resident, and continue to grow the economy, live in our country, etc. So it's not a bad thing that was introduced. In fact, it gave people a lot of opportunities and flexibility if and when the time came. It gave them the opportunity to potentially maintain bank accounts, etc.
I think something that's also quite important with the tax residency and looking at inheritances and all of that is if you are a tax resident, that you are still subject to your 1 million single discretionary allowance. So that's taking 1 million rand over per year that SARB, the Reserve Bank, allows you to take. So if you are still a tax resident, let's say, but you're actually living overseas, you inherit now 5 million. 1 million can go over easily, but the 4 is slightly more difficult. You do have up to 10 million rand, but it is a process, and it's not a simple process. So something to bear in mind for children potentially that could inherit.
And particularly children who may have physically emigrated. Have they closed bank accounts? Do they have access to South African bank accounts? Because those could cause problems at time of receiving an inheritance. Lindsay's here to fill in the gaps when I've missed something and to give me the opportunity to breathe. So thanks, Lindsay. Oh, that sounds like a great idea. So if we have a look, how does one become a tax resident, a non-tax resident? And I think we've covered that a lot in terms of the previous conversation on the previous slide, but certainly not as big an onerous responsibility as possible. In fact, I read a very interesting article in the Business Day yesterday, where they are encouraging South Africans to sort out their tax status so that they can establish what the true status is. And I think it's extremely important that people earning over and above that 1.2 million that may not have resolved their tax status do so as a matter of urgency before SARS start coming through and checking and looking for it.
I think one of the practicalities there is that they require a lot of documentation. SARS will require a lot of documentation to
provide evidence.
Yes, and to make sure that you are a non-tax resident. So if you've immigrated in the 90s, you would need to dig up all those kind of proof of tickets, passport stamps, all of those kind of things. So that is also part of the reason why they are encouraging people to close it off as soon as possible.
So you might ask, why this burning desire to seek alternatives around the world, and why would we talk about international financial planning? And we've just drawn a snapshot from the website in terms of rand-dollar exchange over the last 10 years. And my eyesight is not as good as it used to be, but I think we were looking at 10 years ago, 10 rand to the dollar, just over 10 rand to the dollar, and we're now sitting at 18, 19 rand to the dollar. We've had a lot of fluctuations, and you can see the volatility of that exchange rate. The last 10 years is indicative that the rand is depreciating. We can appreciate that. And unfortunately, with our wealth based in South Africa, that means our buying power is reducing, because a lot of the stuff that we are buying is imported. It has an influence in some form or another what's happening around the world on our currency here, which we can appreciate. So having opportunities to diversifying your wealth, providing solutions with alternative methods is critical in our opinion from the depreciating rand. Also seeking alternative opportunities, having the opportunity of exploring what the rest of the world has to offer, being concerned about the future of our country. All of those are typically points that are raised when having a discussion with somebody who is looking to go overseas. However, we can admit that at the moment we are where we are, people are where they are. We want to have the opportunity and flexibility and compliance to be able to return, to be able to adjust our financial planning as we need to. If we look at that support that comes through in terms of the Discovery Life in international recognition and the access to the experts, the two that I want to make you aware of is a trust company that offers a solution at a very affordable, cost-effective price point, providing solutions for children, be them minors or alternative protections of wealth outside of the country, which is
your offshore trusts.
All offshore trusts as opposed to local trusts. And then we obviously have access to drafting offshore wills. We have access to those that were with our session last month. The months are clearly too short that I think they're just weeks. But last month's presentation, we had access to the fiduciary specialists that can assist us with the drafting of technical wills where there are assets held outside of the country and in different jurisdictions. That's why I take you back to those points of where are your assets. It's extremely important, and what are they? Because that's going to be determining that. But also looking at offshore tax planning, giving you access to accountants that are set up and FAE and experts in that right. And then obviously setting up offshore trusts, as we spoke about a little bit earlier. If we look at Discovery International, the support and the service that's available on the Discovery side, what a lot of people don't realize is that Discovery is potentially one of South Africa's best exports, in my opinion. The Vitality program as such has gone all around the world. And I stand corrected, it's either 26 or 32 countries that we actually have representation in.
Every continent as well.
Every continent. That's the word you were looking for with hemisphere. But so in the representation all around the world, and that Vitality program is the behavioral economics, the behavioral change that Vitality stands by in terms of our product solutions that you may be aware of in the South African context. Not only do they have the Vitality changing behavior, but they also have partnered with various insurance companies, big named insurance companies around the world, health insurance companies, and that's the partnership that has been created, giving flexibility and opportunity. And I've heard and believe that there is potential for some of them to sort of come across border in some instances going forward. But if we look on the far left-hand side, left, right, that side, we have the Dollar Life Plan, which is our product with Discovery that offers you the protection for risk in dollar terms. What that does, as you may know, we should have set a bet that if the phone rings, they buy drinks. No problem. So the Dollar Life Plan, our life plans, I always hate that word. I almost wish that we could call it a risk plan, because that's actually what it is. Disability, retirement, disability, severe illness, income protection. So our risk plan is available in dollar terms. What does that do? It gives you the opportunity to peg the value of your payout. We know it's going to be $200,000. We know it's going to be $500,000. That is irrelevant to what the actual buying power is of that 3 million, 5 million rand that it may be. It pays offshore. It pays directly into an offshore bank account as opposed to paying into a South African bank account. You might ask yourself, why introduce a risk policy? When you're sitting looking at your investments and your planning process and who will be those beneficiaries. If you have two children, one sitting in South Africa, one sitting in Australia, for example, that Australian does not want half of that house, even if it is sitting on Clifton Beach. They want to rather have something cash and tangible. But if you don't have the conversation, you may not know it. Maybe Clifton Beach wasn't a bad example. Yeah. I think I might want that wherever I'm sitting in the world. However, the practicality of them owning that property, if they're a non-tax resident, if they formally immigrated, can potentially become problematic at that time. A dollar life plan gives you the opportunity of providing liquidity immediately offshore to the beneficiaries of that particular policy and the need for it. And everybody, as I say, is different. You may be sitting in the room and going, well, I can't buy life cover. You may know somebody who can, and a dollar life plan is a potential solution that's there. We also have the investment plan, which comes in very important. If you were looking at your list of assets and you had a bank account sitting in the Isle of Man, the UK, the US, wherever it is, the reality is that is going to form part of that estate. It's going to need to be wound up in that country. There will be citus tax, probate that may need to be paid. And if we think our estate duty is hefty, best you go and have a look at some of the estate duty calculations that come out from other countries. It's frightening, the death taxes of assets that are held in foreign countries. Your bank account could predominantly be taken care of by investing it in an endowment wrapper, for example, giving you access to a beneficiary, giving that beneficiary access to the funds at time of death, as opposed to it forming part of your estate. So again, solutions, different solutions for different people, for different needs and for different problems that we're trying to resolve across the board. Not forgetting about our local plans. You have medical aid. We all have medical aid. We have an international travel benefit that gives you and I the opportunity to travel overseas and know that we have the peace of mind that if we needed to be brought back, repatriated, I'm still alive. Is that a repatriation or not? But if I need to be brought back into the country for medical treatment, those costs would be covered by the international travel benefit. So a very nice level of protection on our medical aid. But also what is available is that if you are outside of the country for more than 90 days, that international travel benefit will fall away. So it's important to know that the international travel benefit will fall away. The Discovery Health benefit will still pay out equivalent to what the South African rates would have been. So there is an element of protection, but we can appreciate that if it's a 700 Rand bill, it's not going to cost that in the UK or America or elsewhere. So that's why having medical insurance when you're outside of the country for longer than 90 days is important, but also knowing that you do have access to that. People within Dubai, within Mauritius, for example, this is a huge benefit for them to consider. So anybody living in Mauritius could in actual fact continue their South African medical aid and still have that benefit, provided they're seeking medical attention from doctors and practitioners that are charging an equivalent South African rate.
Don't want to interrupt you again, but we actually did a presentation very similar like this on Vitality Travel, which I would encourage you to watch. So you guys have Canada 2020 website link there on your handout. We've got a blog section where we do put all these recordings. So we did a presentation focused on Vitality Travel, including all your the health benefits when traveling, the foreign bank accounts that Discovery is offering. So worth a watch.
Absolutely. I think also making mention within your handouts that we've given you that we have access to some of our marketing material that's available. We have access through that QR code to interesting articles that you might find interesting on immigration, tax status, etc. So please do go and click on those QR codes. Please find the ones of our social media, like us, post us, send us around the world, because that's the way we grow our business. So please do, but they're all in your handout and available there. I thought Lindsay was going to say, Shirley, it's time to get moving on. So let's move on to the dollar life plan in a little bit more detail. So I think the big thing for me is not only are you given the opportunity of protecting your life in the event of death at a value, you also have the opportunity of converting some of those funds into cash at a later date. So a very nice way to start some financial planning for retirement, having a risk policy, building up a cash component that will pay out at age 65. That's what we call our cash conversion. I've seen it happening with some of my clients that have recently reached the age of 65, and it's magical. I had a client saying to me the other day, Shirley, do you remember us sitting opposite each other in a restaurant where I said to you I wanted to cancel the policy because it was too expensive? And you told me that I was crazy and I had to keep it. And I thought that what's in it for you? Why are you doing this? She says, well, today I can actually thank you because the cash was paid into her bank account tax-free. So it is magical when it happens. And the building up of that wealth in dollars is really truly beneficial on that side of it. But also remembering that we have some incredibly innovative products that come out of the Discovery stable. They won, for example, the most innovative life insurance product for the global education in the world. And that was, I think, 2 years ago, I stand corrected. And that Global Education Protector is giving a member the opportunity to protect their children's education in the event of a death, a disability, or a severe illness, giving the family the peace of mind that if anything happened to that parent, the breadwinner, that the children's education would carry on. It's typically locally an indemnity product, which means it gets paid directly to the institution. There's nobody who receives it and then makes up the mind of, should I buy shoes and handbags or should I educate my child? It gets paid directly to the institution. Our global one gives you the opportunity of your child being able to go to an international school, university, if that's what they choose to. So global education, not only does it happen at time of death, but it gives you the peace of mind that if the child reaches 18, they have what they call a university funder. Now, again, you might be asking me, but surely we're not in the audience of buying and needing to educate our children. We've done that potentially. You may be the guardian of a grandchild. And if you're the guardian of a grandchild, your biggest expense is going to be education. And I would then recommend that that conversation is had to say, do you have a product, a protection in place that's going to pay for the education? So I think it's very important that you take the thinking not only from ourselves, but to our family, to our friends that we're talking to on an ongoing basis. Discovery have special offers, and now is no different from normal. And what they do is they say it's onerous. We don't know what's going to happen to this rand. So what we do is we convert it and give you a special offer of up to 3 years of paying 14.90 rand per rand for the dollar. Okay, so let's try and unpack that. Right now we know the exchange rate is sitting at 18.90, 19 rand. For the next 3 years, the exchange rate will be locked in to 14.90. T's and C's applicable, and thereafter 3 years, it goes back to the prevailing exchange rate, or a currency protector gets built into it to manage what is happening to that rand dollar. So it gives you the opportunity to taste, experience it, and then adapt and adjust as life evolves. I could argue that in 3 years' time, you potentially need less life cover, because your children have grown, your estate may have shrunk, you may have disposed of some assets in your lifetime, etc. And in which case, we can then look to service the policy down at that point in time. Again, giving you solutions for potential issues and problems that may be. How does the special offer work? We have the option of using the travel allowance that Lindsay's referred to there in terms of that 1 million that we as tax residents have the opportunity of taking offshore without applying to SARS for clearance. That includes your holiday travels. That includes money being sent overseas potentially for kids, etc., as well as the purchasing of these types of insurance that may be. And I would be arguing that we should be considering to make use of that 1 million opportunity to transfer funds offshore when we believe the rand is at an optimal point. And if anybody knows that, They wouldn't be sitting in the room, they'd probably be on a yacht in the Bahamas somewhere, enjoying it. But I think the idea is to have a value in your head and move it offshore at that point in time, as opposed to maintaining everything in a local currency. On that point, we have a offshore investment workshop that we did that's available on the website, and I'd recommend you go and listen to that. One of the points was a good rule of thumb is to consider to have at least 25-30% of your assets sitting offshore in a diversified fund as a given, just to lock in those values. We could debate and argue that all day. I'm watching Robin thinking he would have a few cents to put in there, I have no doubt, as would a lot of other people. We have some case studies. I don't want to bore you and go into too much details. We do still have 10 or 15 minutes. Do you want to do it?
Yeah, sure.
Go for it.
So we wanted to put some scenarios in place. I think it just makes it nice to kind of visualize. So you've got a South African person who's living abroad. He was born in South Africa. He has a South African ID number, but he's no longer a tax resident. He has family living in South Africa. Here, a dollar life option, a dollar life plan would be a brilliant option for him, because that policy can pay out wherever in the world. So it can pay out in Dubai if he has bank accounts for his children there. It can pay out in South Africa. And something just to bear in mind is that those payouts are free of estate duty tax if they are paid out internationally. So a really nice benefit to make use of in terms of that case.
Another scenario that you could look at and consider is potentially a South African with a single parent with a minor child. Potentially that minor child may need to have funds. They've decided that they want the dollar life plan. What's very important is that a minor cannot inherit. A minor cannot physically receive funds. So what may happen in that instance is it causes all sorts of problems in terms of who is actually going to get that money, where is it going to be paid. And what Discovery have as a solution is what they call a bottom drawer trust, an offshore trust that is set up that will only be initiated at time of death. So it's not one where you're needing to go through the onerous process of setting up the offshore trust, paying all the offshore fees, etc., perhaps potentially never to use it. It gives you the opportunity of it being available to be set up at that time. Some very interesting ways of dealing with estate duty problems. Clients with large estates have an onerous tax responsibility, 25% for assets over 30 million. That can become substantial. If we add a life policy to mitigate and pay those estate duties, we're compounding the problem, because the estate is growing at that value of the death cover being paid out. A way to overcome that and circumvent it is to potentially look to have a dollar life plan that will pay out to this trust company, and the trust company have an instruction to pay your estate duty. So there's different ways of structuring it to try and maximize your planning and your current situation and find a solution that's workable. Go for it.
So I think this is a case that we are seeing more and more, is that the parents are still living in South Africa, and you've got children that are now living overseas. And Shirley has mentioned this already, is that it's impractical for them to inherit a physical property in South Africa, especially if they are no longer a resident or have no interest in living in South Africa anymore. So a dollar life plan forms a really nice capital cash injection in the estate, or directly to that beneficiary. And as mentioned before, it's free of estate duty tax and can pay out into the international bank account of that child. Yeah, I think that's pretty much it in a nutshell.
I think we'll stop with the life side of it now and perhaps look at the investment side of it. And I think I touched on it very briefly in terms of those flexible investments, those unit trusts, those investments that form part of your estate. Having them form part of your estate is problematic. And I'd be suggesting that you sit with an advisor to understand what the consequences could be and what the potential solutions could be. There are some incredibly innovative solutions that could add not only capital growth to your investments, also tax efficiency, and then obviously efficiency at time of death, which I think is what we would all want for our loved ones that are left behind.
I think also something important to note there is a life policy has a cutoff time in terms of being able to apply for a life policy. So as an alternative, this offshore endowment has no restriction on lifespan, but it does create a way or a vehicle for you to be able to channel any funds that you've got in South Africa offshore that can then pay to beneficiaries who are themselves offshore.
Another example that was made apparent to us recently was a family member who had a property in the US, no family living in the US. They wanted to maintain the property for growth and wealth creation. An idea or a thought is perhaps to liquidate that, invested in a property portfolio within the US, still have access to the US property portfolio market, but potentially have a beneficiary link to it, which would then eliminate some of the onerous tax responsibilities at time of death in the form of probate, etc. Again, the examples can be plentiful, and I think I don't want to belabor the point too much. We've spoken about the 25-30% sitting offshore, etc., eliminating some of the tax responsibilities.
And also just the management of an international estate. So if you do pass away and you have property overseas, do you have a foreign will that's up to date? Who's the executor on that? Who's going to manage that if you don't have family also living in that same country? So it becomes quite a tedious process to manage those offshore assets.
So I think we are going to move on to the next slide and just ask yourselves a couple of questions here. Do you know what your wishes are? Are they written down in that will to an extent that your beneficiaries are going to understand what it is, what the wishes are? I come across many clients who ask to update their wills. We do that. That is one of the solutions we offer within the practice. We have various options in terms of executorship. We have the opportunity of running the executorship ourselves in-house. We have the opportunity of taking that to an ABSA or to an institution. We have the opportunity of you nominating yourself as the executor and then, you know, choosing to decide who would be the executor at time of death of loved ones to choose that. We have Fidelis Fox, I can never pronounce their Paul and Martine from last month, where they too. So there's various solutions in terms of that will. But when somebody says, please update my will, it's easy in the big scheme of things to do that. But if you don't know what those assets are and you don't know where those assets are, I could do a will that says this will cancels all other wills previously written. Now, if you have a will in the UK, this one's cancelling it. Is that what you want? So it's extremely important that the person drafting the will knows exactly what assets you have, exactly where they are, and then detailing it. It could be this is my South African will for my South African assets. And then in which case to ensure that there is a will that covers those countries. Also bearing in mind that the law of the land may dictate. In some instances, you might not be able to leave it to your daughter. You may need to leave it to your son, etc. So that you have to just make sure what are the religious requirements, what are the legal and the country of laws requirements in terms of that. So drafting the will is extremely important, but knowing what you want, having it drafted, and then also having the conversation with your loved ones, have they got it in place so that it doesn't become your problem if and when something happens, particularly if you're going to be the guardian of their children. Is it practical? Can it happen? A lot of people say they have properties galore, but no cash. Well, it's very difficult to eat bricks and mortar. You need to have cash to settle all the death taxes. You need to have cash to live, etc. So making sure that there's liquidity in the estate in the will is extremely important as well. And making sure that there's access to it, because an estate can take some time to be wound up. And in that time period, what happens? How do the beneficiaries, how do they have access to funds? Making sure that those questions have been asked. Checking your portfolio is structured in a tax efficient manner, that we're not going to be paying executive fees on an investment that could have perhaps been passed directly to the beneficiary. So tax efficiency is extremely important. And then making sure that you know what your family's tax situation is and what their tax status is, and encouraging them to do the work, to pay the little penalty that there may be at this stage, rather than waiting for it to grow and grow and grow until it becomes massive and problematic at a later stage.
Just to link in there is also to have that family discussion based on our presentation from last month. Is everyone always needs to be on the same page, family charter, that everyone has full clarity of what might happen on your passing, on their passing, just to have that transparency.
Because after all, there's two things we're certain of: death and taxes. So we here at Candid 2020 are here to help and assist and advise. With that, we come to the end of the presentation. I would encourage you perhaps just to sit and think for a minute or two of what questions do you have in your mind that you want answers to. You may not know them now, you may not wish to approach them now. You may wish to carry them through at a later stage. We're going into a long weekend, and hopefully that means some rest and relaxation and copious amounts of alcohol that will then perhaps break some of the memory and the thought of tonight. So just make some notes of what questions do you have that you would want answers to? What topics of discussion would you like more information on? What benefits, what solutions interested you, if any? And is there anybody else who might get value from this talk, our solutions that we have? Anybody wish to ask a question at this point of time? We've got one online. Aha. And this is where we all look strange into the camera and everybody.
Can you just write an international clause into the will that does not revoke that will in a foreign country?
Andrew, purely and simply because you are who you are, I'm not going to pass my comment on it and thought, I'll find that out for you and come back to you. I wouldn't see why not, because at the end of the day, it's a contract and it's an instruction. So saying that it's going to simply be cancelling the South African will would, in my interpretation, be possible. But what I will do is run that past the advocates and the professionals that we do have access to, and then just give you some feedback.
He says we can in a UK will, and we can promote having a will in each country.
Yeah. And that's exactly what we do, is promote having a will in each country. And what I'll do is just confirm and what the term should be to be able to revoke the specific country's will and not any others outside of the country. Thanks, Andrew. Any questions?
Do you know yet what your topic of conversation will be
for next month?
It's a surprise.
Surprised us all at the moment.
What would you like our topic of conversation to be next month?
More on the health, or discovery health?
More on the medical aid side. Ironically, that was a second question or request. We had one of those earlier tonight. So that's certainly
anything
something
specific on the health side?
Anybody else got any ideas or suggestions or burning desires?
I just wanted to ask, I have a son who is a resident in the UK, but he has property in South Africa. But as far as I know, he's not a tax resident at all here in South Africa. But now you said he must have proof of income from the SA, which he's never had, I don't think.
So
he hasn't never had tax.
The property in South Africa, does he rent it out? Or is it not at the moment?
Yeah, he does rent it out.
He does rent it out. So his income that he'd be earning from that particular property would be taxable in South Africa.
But it's not taxed in South Africa. He does it in the UK.
So
It's written in the UK.
any non-tax residents holding a property and an income, earning an income in South Africa from that property, be it investments, be it, would be responsible for the tax in South Africa.
He doesn't pay tax.
He would be for those assets. So he should be seeking accounting advice in terms of making sure that that's being accounted for correctly.
So I think something to mention, even if you are a non-tax resident, you can still pay South African tax and it becomes source-based. So the source is the property. So that's something.
Okay, then you mentioned here that more than 91 days in South Africa, you potentially liable for, but only if you're earning 1.1 million. But so that rental does not come to more than 1.1 million.
Yeah.
So, but your property and your investment portfolio generating income would be taxed in South Africa, regardless of whether you're a tax resident or not. So we know all of lots of foreigners coming into South Africa buying properties, and they can buy properties in our country. If they are generating an income from that, it's taxed in South Africa.
Any other questions?
I can see Margaret's got lots of notes. I'm inspired. We are here to help. We're here to solve your problem solutions, find solutions that are workable. And we will be reaching out to you. So if you do have particular questions, please feel free to ask. We are going to encourage you to eat the leftovers so that they are all gone. Stay and have another drink, network, chat, catch up, and then please, thank you very much for coming through and spending your valuable time with us. We do appreciate it. And our team are here to help and assist, and I want to thank them very much for staying on an Easter weekend evening and being here to help and support. So I thank you and I appreciate it. I appreciate all the help and assistance, even our resident barman there, Jacques. Thank you very much. Please go and support him. Help yourselves. Have a very
Tips are welcome.
have a very blessed Easter, and I do trust that you'll all be safe and have lots of fun, and we'll see you again soon. We'll let you know our next topic, but thank you very much. Thank you.